Hello?
Okay, we're just going to get started. I know there's still some people joining in. Just want to make sure that we respect everyone's time. So thank you for everyone who's joined us this evening. This meeting is being recorded, so it will be available later. All guests have their video feed off, but later when it comes time for question and answers, you will be unmuted so you can ask staff freely what your question is. So we're getting started. I have a couple of guests this evening. I'm going to go to Deputy Mayor Morgan to bring brief greetings, and then I'll recognize our Member of Parliament for London Fanshawe. Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yes, hi everyone, and thank you, Councillor Pelosa. On behalf of the mayor, I just wanted to come and say hello and send some best wishes, and of course thank all of the constituents across the city who are participating in these budget sessions. Your input is obviously very important, and Councillor Pelosa, who is our budget chair as well for the city, plays a very important role during this process. So I know some of you are her constituents. I know some of you might be tuning in because she's the budget chair, but we certainly appreciate all of the work that she's doing to guide us through the budget process and ensure she wrangles us in the debate to make sure that all the views of all the constituents across the city are represented, but that we are efficient and effective in our debate as well. So that's all I came for, and I look forward to seeing what all the feedback is from the residents as we continue through the budget process. So thanks, Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you. I will now recognize Member of Parliament Lindsay Matheson.
Thank you so much. Like the Deputy Mayor had said, I too am so grateful that there are people that are participating in this activity in this time of year. It's so incredibly important that people participate in our democracy. We don't see it enough, I think, and I'm always encouraged to know that there are people that take that time. I really do want to thank Councillor Pelosa as well. She is one of the incredible councillors in my area of London Fanshawe, and I'm always very grateful. She works very, very hard to ensure that the people in her ward are well represented. And I know that across the board, she is very, very well respected. And I too really appreciate always being invited to these things, to these meetings, so that I learn a lot. My focus is often very federal, and I'm actually in Ottawa right now, but I appreciate being able to hear opinions and what's going on, and keep track of things that are happening in our city and our community. So thank you so much, and I hope that you have a good meeting.
Thank you, and thank you for making time even while you're away in Ottawa doing good work federally for us, and for making time for us and recognizing it takes all levels of government working together to deliver services for all Londoners, regardless of where you're at in economic, social status and whatnot, that everyone needs to be provided for. So thank you for that. For anyone this evening, including MP Matheson and our Deputy Mayor, they can come and go. You can all come and go as you like. It was recorded later. We all have lives and children and other things with our time, so don't feel obligated to stay. It is a good time. I promise you that, as you will get a glimpse into my summer vacation with Mr. Kyle Murray as the budget. That's when it comes to fruition and we work on it. So it has been months and months and months of hard work with our staff behind the scenes, working to get this for you. It is a multi-year budget, which means we set this budget a few years ago, and each year we update. Deputy Mayor Morgan was our budget chair at that point, and now you have me. So tonight, at the end of after staff's presentation, residents will have hopefully a better understanding of what the multi-year budget is and how we get to these numbers. And then you can ask your questions freely. We may or may not be done ahead of schedule, but that is completely up to the residents this evening. So everyone can come and go as they need to. There's no pressure. It's a very informal chat, just getting an understanding of how we got here and what is happening. So thank you for those who gave their time. And Mr. Murray, I will hand it over to you if we can begin your presentation for residents.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor, for inviting us here tonight. Really appreciate the opportunity to connect with as many Londoners as we can through this process. It's critically important that you have the opportunity to learn about our budget and also to provide your feedback on it. So, very, very happy to join you. Happy to walk through a few slides that we've put together to help guide the conversation tonight. So I'm just going to get started on those. So if you've been following along with our budget process this year, you'll know that we tabled our 2022 budget update about a week and a half or so ago, back on November the 9th. And certainly that document is up on our website. If you haven't had the opportunity yet to go and peruse the document, no problem. It's up there. It can be it's accessible at any time. London.ca/budget is the web address to access our budget document. It's also available on the getinvolved.london.ca public engagement portal as well. So you can also access the materials through that website as well. If you follow our budget process or have followed it in previous years, you may notice a bit of a difference for this year in that all three of our budgets, our property tax budget, our water budget, and our wastewater treatment budget, are all now contained in one document. So in previous years, they used to be in two different documents. This year, you will find all budget materials and information in one spot. So hopefully that makes it a little easier to find what you're looking for as it relates to specific budget matters. So this slide is really the city's multi-year budget in one graphic, really. And you know, it's a bit of a refresher on our multi-year budget process. As the councillor mentioned in her opening remarks, we do utilize a 4-year budget cycle at the City of London. And this year's budget, the 2022 budget, represents the second annual update to our 2020 to 2023 multi-year budget. So the annual update process is really council's opportunity to make course corrections within the multi-year budget cycle. So it's actually kind of something we chuckle about a little bit, in that we actually approved our 4-year multi-year budget on March 2nd, 2020, and then basically 2 weeks later, COVID hit us pretty hard in this region and really kind of threw things for a loop. So, you know, that kind of just goes to show, I guess, the importance of having the ability to make adjustments and course corrections on the fly. You never know what's going to happen, so it's good to be able to adjust as need be as things progress. So I think the most critical or important point to note about an annual budget update is that it's not a full-scale redo of the budget. It is more about any material changes or adjustments that need to be made based on anything that has come up during the course of the past year. And typically what you'll see in an annual budget update are budget amendments that fall into one of three categories typically. We sometimes see new or changed regulations that come up or legislation that has changed that may have a financial impact to the city that we need to adjust for. So this is one of the things that you sometimes see through an annual budget update. There could be a new council direction that has occurred since the approval of the multi-year budget and more specifically over the course of the past year. So that is something else that you may see adjusted for during an annual budget update. And finally, there may be unanticipated cost or revenue issues or drivers that have come up that require adjustment through the budget process. So those are really the primary three categories that you see during the course of an annual budget update. Before we dig into this year's budget specifically, I did want to provide a little context and I guess set the stage in terms of how London compares across the province to some of the other larger municipalities across Ontario. So this is Ontario municipalities with populations greater than 100,000 people. And this shows a comparison of average residential property taxes across those municipalities. So you can see London is the blue bar on this slide. Our average residential property tax is $3,262 per year. The provincial average is the red bar that you see on screen. That's $4,337 per year. So London does certainly come in much below the average of these municipalities, and actually, in fact, third from the bottom. So I will just caution that this is based on 2020 information. We don't yet have 2021 data, but this, I think, does at least give you a sense of relative relationship between London and other municipalities. So it's a fairly similar story for commercial property taxes. So again, this slide shows average commercial property taxes for prime commercial office space. And this is on a per square foot basis. So London, again, the green bar, the cost in London of property taxes is $3.12 per square foot. The average is the red bar at $3.69 per square foot. So again, London is certainly skewed towards the lower end of the spectrum and certainly well below the average. And finally, for industrial property taxes, again, London comes in third from the bottom on that measurement as well. So at $1.48 per square foot, London is fairly considerably below the average of $2.11 per square foot. So as we embark on a new budget process, we always like to provide, I guess, a bit of a reminder in terms of some of the different factors that can affect the property tax increase for any specific property in the city. So there are a number of different factors that actually go into determining what your specific property tax increase will be, but only two of those factors are really within the control of the city and the control of council. And those two pieces are the budget increase, which we're obviously here talking about tonight, as well as the council approved tax policy. Tax policy is something that happens separately, typically in the spring after the budget process is complete. There are a number of other factors, though, that go into determining property taxes for any given property. Education tax policy, which is a provincial mandate, could certainly factor in, as could any changes in assessed value for the property. Property reassessments are not done by the city. Those are done by the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, otherwise known as MPAC. So that's a completely independent company from the city. And there also could be other changes at the provincial level that may impact property taxes as well. So that is another factor that could influence the property tax increase for any given property. One of the things that we often hear, and just circling back to the comment I made about assessed value, changes in assessed value, one of the common misconceptions we hear is that, oh, well, the assessed value of my property is increasing, therefore I'm going to see a significant property tax increase. And that's simply not the case. It's only if the assessed value of your property increases by more than the average increase for all other properties in that class that you would see a greater property tax increase because of that reassessment. On the flip side, if your property value increases less than the average for that class of properties, then you would see a lesser property tax increase. So to say, apply a blanket statement that a reassessment automatically will drive a greater property tax increase for you, that's simply not true. It's a common misconception that we hear, but it's not true. So it's always something that we like to make sure that we're reiterating every year. In terms of the two specific factors that the city does have control over, I think this slide provides a nice graphical representation of the difference between the two. So obviously we're here tonight talking about budget, and really the best way to think about the budget or the goal of the budget is it basically sets the size of the pie that we're dealing with here, or establishes how big of a pie we're talking about in terms of the amount of funding that needs to be collected for municipal operations. Tax policy, on the other hand, deals with how that pie is going to be sliced. So obviously there are a number of different property classes across the city. There's residential, commercial, industrial, multi-residential, and so on. Tax policy deals with how the total budget pie is going to be carved up. So that's really the difference between the budget and the tax policy discussion that occurs later. So let's get into the specifics of the 2022 budget update that we'll be going through this year. So this slide gives you a bit of a sense of what the property tax situation is shaping up to be like. So the gray dotted line is where we stood after last year's 2021 budget update, and the blue line is where we will land this year if all budget amendments that are included in this year's budget update are approved by council during budget deliberations. So for this year, there are 12 different property tax budget amendments. 8 of those budget amendments are operating budget amendments, and 4 of them are capital budget amendments. For the 8 operating budget amendments, 1 results in a budget increase, 6 of them result in budget decreases, and 1 has no overall impact on the tax levy. And for the 4 capital budget amendments, none of them have any impact on the tax levy this year. So if all of those amendments are approved, that would bring the 2022 property tax increase down from 3.8% to 2.8%, so a 1 percentage point reduction. And it would reduce the 4-year average increase from 3.8% to 3.6%. You can see on the screen at the bottom what that would mean from the perspective of the average property tax or property owner in terms of the reduction to property taxes. So it would reduce the average annual increase from $113 to $109. So let's talk a little bit about the specific budget amendments that we'll be dealing with this year. So starting with the property tax supported operating budget amendments. Budget amendment number 1 is in relation to zero-based reviews and other budget right sizing that the civic administration for the city has worked through over the course of the past year. So we're very mindful of being as efficient and cost effective in delivering our services as we can be. So we're regularly reviewing all of our budgets to ensure that they align with the resources that we need to deliver the services that Londoners rely on. So we're always making sure that our budgets are right sized. And as part of this work, we've been able to identify $3.7 million of budget reductions for 2022 and $3.3 million on a permanent basis thereafter. The important thing to note about this budget amendment specifically is that this does not impact service levels whatsoever. This is strictly about aligning our budgets to the services and service levels that we are currently delivering. Budget amendment number 2 is the only increase that affects the property tax levy this year, and it's in relation to the Middlesex London Health Unit. So through the Health Unit's 2021 budget process, they identified approximately $762,000 of budget pressures on their end, of which $640,000 is the City of London's share. The other portion is funded by the County of Middlesex. And because of the timing of the health unit's budget process, which occurs after the city's budget process, we weren't able to reflect these increases in our budget last year. So we need to bring forward this amendment at this point in order to address those pressures now. Property tax budget amendment number 3 is a one-time $850,000 request from RBC Place London. You may also know RBC Place as the London Convention Center. So as we all know, we're still in the midst of the pandemic, and certainly, while some things are starting to normalize, at least to a certain degree, there's still not the extent of larger events that there was pre-pandemic. So certainly, as things start to continue to open up, it's hoped that larger events are able to happen more frequently. But for the time being, RBC Place is going to be quite limited in terms of the events that they're able to host, at least for the first few months of 2022. So RBC Place has requested $850,000 of one-time funding, and the hope is that will get them through to the second part of 2022, which at that point they hope they'll be self-sustaining. So we're suggesting that we use one of our reserves to pay for this $850,000 request. So that would mean there's no tax levy impact as a result. Budget amendment number 4 is in relation to our private parking enforcement program, which is a program that we offer to private property owners. And this program is really about enforcing unauthorized parking on private land. So what's being suggested is an increase in the fine from $45 to $60 for unauthorized parking on private property. And while the goal of this amendment is not to generate budget savings, it's more about an increased deterrent against trespassing. It does have a minor $100,000 savings or reduction impact to our budget this year, and an ongoing basis as well. Budget amendment number 5 is a one-time, one-year reduction of approximately $2.8 million, and it relates to previous investments that council approved through the multi-year budget in relation to childcare and to Ontario Works. So as part of last year's budget update process, we deferred this funding, this additional investment, by 1 year because COVID was impacting these areas, and the funding wouldn't be needed last year. For this year, we're suggesting a further 1-year deferral as it relates to the childcare component of this increase. It's intended to fund new childcare spaces, and unfortunately, because of COVID, those new childcare spaces won't be ready until later in 2022. So we won't require this funding for 2022. Similarly, for Ontario Works, there's been a number of other income support programs that have been offered by particularly the federal government. And of course, those are now starting to wind down, but those programs were resulting in lower than anticipated caseload for Ontario Works. So we anticipate our caseload will grow over the course of the next year, but certainly will not yet quite be back to pre-pandemic levels. So there's some funding in Ontario Works that we anticipate not requiring for 2022. The important point to note on this one is that for both portions of this amendment, that funding will remain in the budget and available for those investments in 2023. So budget amendment number 6, recognizing that we're heading into this year with a fairly substantial tax levy increase, we sought to identify opportunities to bring forward reductions, and budget amendment number 6 identifies 2 potential opportunities for budgetary reductions that council could consider. So the first part is a $600,000 permanent reduction to our infrastructure gap reserve fund contribution. And the second part is a $50,000 reduction to our CIP community building projects investment as well. So again, these are opportunities, should council support them, to provide some tax levy relief without substantially impacting the additional investments that the council has approved. Budget amendments 7 and 8, again, were brought forward recognizing the tax levy pressures that we were facing for this year. So these are other opportunities that council could consider in order to bring the tax levy down. So budget amendment number 7 is a 3-part amendment. The first part is a 50% reduction to our neighborhood decision-making program. That would be $125,000 of budget reductions. The second part of that is a 50% reduction to our neighborhood small events fund. That's a $10,000 savings. And finally, the third part is a $100,000 reduction to our athletic travel grants program. Budget amendment number 8 is a two-parter. So the first part is approximately $150,000 reduction to our grass cutting budget. So what would effectively happen is some portions of city parks would no longer be cut. They would essentially be allowed to naturalize, and that would allow us to save some funding in terms of mowing those portions of the parks. The second part of budget amendment number 8 is a reduction to our proactive tree trimming budget of $100,000. So I want to be very clear that this is not affecting our response to hazard trees or to limbs that have fallen in storms. This is more about our proactive tree trimming budget, for example, the shaping of trees or that sort of thing. So again, budget amendments 7 and 8 are opportunities for council to lower the tax levy if they so choose to support. So we'll go on to the capital budget amendments now. So budget amendment number 9 is a amendment that's being brought forward in direct response to council direction from earlier this year. So council directed a budget amendment to continue funding for our invasive plant management strategy. So this budget amendment requests $375,000 per year for the next 3 years, funded from one of our reserve funds. So it does not have a tax levy impact. Budget amendment number 10 relates to a handful of transportation capital projects that are coming up in the upcoming years. And you see them specifically on screen, Sunningdale, Southdale, and Warncliffe. So we're now at a stage where we have better information regarding these projects. And so we're now able to right size the budgets or adjust the budgets to align with the cost that we anticipate those projects will require. So these projects are largely funded through development charges. So these do not have a tax levy increase either. So budget amendment number 11 is the adjustment to our capital plan in relation to the proposed expansion of the W12A landfill. So now that we have a better sense of how we're going to go about expanding the landfill, we're able to adjust our capital budget accordingly. So what you see on screen here is approximately $10 million of increases to our capital plan over the next approximately 7 years. What you're not seeing is the actual savings in our budget beyond 2029. So actually, when we get out beyond 2029, the cost or the budget that we require is actually less. And on an overall basis, this budget for this project is actually being reduced by approximately $8 million. So it's actually, I think, a good news story in that we're actually able to bring down the budget for this project. Budget amendment number 12 is a fairly substantial one, and it relates to the initial implementation of London Transit's zero-emission bus implementation strategy. So you may have heard that London Transit is beginning the work to transition to a zero emissions bus fleet or an electric bus fleet. This is to secure funding to initiate the first phase of that work. So we're still, London Transit is still in the process of working through what the final implementation strategy looks like, and it's anticipated that we'll see that in early 2022. But this funding will allow us to get started on that work. So we're hoping that we're able to secure funding, hopefully 50% funding through a new zero emission transit fund program that is now available through Infrastructure Canada. So the hope is that a good portion of this amendment will be funded through that program. So again, none of the capital budget amendments have a tax levy impact. Quickly on the water and wastewater budgets, there are two budget amendments for the water budget this year. Both of them are simply adjusting the timing of some of our capital projects by pushing them back a year, either to align with other capital projects that are planned in 2023, or to allow us to complete some background work that we need to do in order to assess the timing and the scope of the capital work. Both of these amendments have no impact on the previously approved water rate increases of 2.5% and 2.5% effective January 1st, 2022 and 2023, respectively. On the wastewater side, there is one budget amendment this year, but it's a two-parter. So the first part is certainly definitely a good news story. And in fact, I think both parts are good news stories. But the first part is a result of some energy efficiency initiatives that have been undertaken at our wastewater treatment plants in recent years. That's allowed us to identify savings in our utility budgets, which we're suggesting be repurposed as part of the second part of this budget amendment to create a new capital project for addressing sewage bypasses and overflows at our wastewater treatment plants. So if you follow the news, you may hear that from time to time during significant storms, sometimes sewage ends up getting bypassed from our wastewater treatment plants because they can't manage the volume of wastewater flowing through at that point in time. So sometimes sewage does end up getting bypassed into the Thames River. So the goal of this capital project would be to provide a funding source to undertake projects to help address that problem. Similar to water, there is no impact on the approved wastewater rate increases as a result of these amendments. The increases will still be 2.5% effective both January 1st, 2022 and 2023. So let's talk a little bit about key dates in this year's budget process. So the next, I guess, major milestone is coming up early next week on Monday. So we have our public participation meeting. That happens at our Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee starting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's really the opportunity for residents to come and directly address council and advise of their feedback on the budget and provide their comments and their input into the process. So if you're interested in attending, I'd certainly encourage you to do so, to provide your feedback. You can also provide written feedback as well. So there's the ability to provide written comments as well that will be seen by all members of council. The deliberations for this year's budget update actually get underway a week from today, so December 2nd. We also have December 3rd set aside if we need it, but hoping we can get through in one day. Ultimately, the 2022 budget update will be approved in final form by council on December 21st. So perhaps the most important slide of the whole presentation I've saved for last here. So it's really about how you can provide feedback and get more information if you need it. So specifically, if you have questions or you want more information, I'd encourage you to visit london.ca/budget or getinvolved.london.ca. We have all of our budget materials posted up there. So certainly encourage you to go and check those out. There's lots of great educational materials as well. Some great videos, what we call finance flicks, on how budgets and municipal finance work. So you can certainly have a look at those as well. I'll put in a shameless plug for our email newsletter. So you can sign up on our Get Involved website for regular updates via our newsletter. So that's an option as well. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to our budget team. Budget@london.ca is probably the easiest way to get in touch, but certainly feel free to give us a call as well if you have any questions. And if you're looking to provide feedback, I'd certainly encourage you to do that in one of two ways, either through the public participation meeting, which is happening this coming Monday, or through contacting Councillor Pelosa directly. I know all councillors greatly appreciate the feedback of their constituents and understanding their priorities and their thoughts on the budget. So I've included Councillor Pelosa's contact information here on screen. Certainly encourage you to reach out with your feedback directly to her. So that's all the slides I have. I'll turn it back over to the councillor.
Perfect, Mr. Murray, for that overview. The link was put in at the beginning of the chat for the full documents if you want to view them online. The dates that Mr. Murray laid out for you, it is this coming Monday at the public participation meeting. I will be chairing it, and it is the public's opportunity to give comments. But unlike tonight, you can ask questions, but you won't get an answer. It is strictly for the public to state what you're passionate about, what you'd like to see, what you don't like. But it is not a two-way conversation. That is the joy of what you get tonight, is you get Mr. Murray, myself, and certainly if questions aren't answered here tonight, we can follow up afterwards. One person did ask if since the meeting is being recorded, yes, it will be available later. We'll send out a thank you note to participants for giving us your time this evening with a link to the recording. Plus, I'll put it on my website and Facebook page, so you can also share it with others if they're interested to know what is a budget, how do we get here. So for questions and answers tonight, we are a smaller group, so we will still be mindful of time, but you do have an opportunity to ask your question yourself. Video is not enabled, but you can either type your question or even just put your hand up, and we'll just have a casual conversation that way. So Marianne, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question to Mr. Murray?
I can, but I'm not sure how my volume's okay.
Your volume's perfect, so please go ahead.
Okay, my question was the P11 budget item, which was the landfill expansion. Does that include any costs for the green bin program, or is that just the landfill expansion?
Thanks, Marianne. That's a great question. This budget amendment specifically is just dealing with the landfill expansion. The green bin program was actually dealt with separately through a business case in our multi-year budget a couple years ago, our 2020 to 2023 multi-year budget. So funding for the green bin program is already in place and approved through that business case a couple years ago. So they are separate things, but we've already dealt with the green bin funding requirement through that business case.
Perfect. And just on that, as green bins does come to the Civic Works Committee, and I'm also chair of that committee, we're still in the procurement process and on track for the waste trucks that we're going to need for collection. There has been some supply chain issues, as there are in many industries, but staff have been very diligent and creative in finding ways to get different partners to the table and still getting us exactly what we need. On the website getinvolved.london.ca, they're still collecting feedback of how Londoners would like to see that green bin program look. We have not decided on the size of container and the frequency of pickup for garbage or green bins. So people are encouraged to still go there and ask their, give their feedback, as that program's still being designed. Claire has raised her hand. Claire, would you like to, Leardon will unmute you if you can't do so for yourself, and you can ask your question.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'd just like to talk a little more about the public participation meeting coming up on Monday, and specifically in terms of, I'm working with a group of very engaged citizens, and we're working on a big idea that we believe will have impact across the city. So I guess my question is this the appropriate place and time for a group of citizens with an idea to present? Is this the appropriate place and time? Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
So that will really depend, I guess, on the nature of what it is you're working on and contemplating. Typically, the public participation meeting that we do for budget is specifically in regards to the budget for that year or funding requirements for future years as well. So depending on the nature of what it is that we're talking about, there may be different avenues to go about providing that. And certainly, the various standing committees of the city do occasionally receive submissions from members of the public. And certainly delegations do happen as well from time to time. So those standing committees, there are a handful of them, and they all have very different mandates. So, for example, Councillor Pelosa mentioned the Civic Works Committee that obviously, as it sounds, deals more with the infrastructure of the city. There's also, for example, our Community and Protective Services Committee, which deals with some of the more social type services, I guess, of the city. We have our Planning and Environment Committee as well. We have our Corporate Services Committee. So it will really, I guess, depend on the nature of the issue, and that may kind of provide some guidance or clarity on when the best time to bring that forward would be. But having said that, certainly if you have comments or feedback or input on the budget, certainly the public participation meeting next week is a great opportunity to provide that.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Councillor?
Yeah, I do know Claire. Claire, did you want to get something more specific out of Mr. Murray at this point, or would you like to connect with him offline?
I think I would love the opportunity to connect offline if that's an option. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Very happy to do so. kmurray@london.ca.
Fantastic.
KMURRAY@london.ca.
Great. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Claire. Just I know hers is very specific and will need more direction. We do have several people waiting to ask a question, so I'm going to go to Molly next and then Bob. Molly, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi. Yeah, I was just wondering about the big reduction to the neighborhood decision-making process and what that means for that program.
Yeah, so that would be a 50% reduction in terms of the funding available for that program. So it's currently a $250,000 annual program. It would be reduced basically in half to $125,000 per year. What that would specifically mean in terms of how the program functions, I don't believe that has been finalized as of yet. In terms of whether that will be a 50% reduction to all funding pots available to all areas of the city. So instead of each section of the city having $50,000 to work with, maybe it's only $25,000, or alternatively, whether that would mean that certain areas of the city get their turn every other year, for example. That could be another way that if this is approved, another way that the program could be structured going forward. I don't believe that's been finalized yet, to my knowledge, but there are certainly different ways of adjusting the program should council approve that reduction.
Yeah. Molly, did you have a follow-up comment based on Mr. Murray's comments?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what was the impetus for that cut? Is there a reason there?
Yeah, so Kyle, I'll jump in on this one.
Sure.
That is one of the 4 consideration cases, as council directed staff to go back and say, like, bring us anything that we can consider. This is one of them. This neighborhood decision making was implemented in the prior term of council. It was one of Deputy Mayor Morgan's passions that he brought forward. This term of council, the program had already been revamped once. It used to be 50,000 per area, and in some areas, one winning idea took all the money. And this year we revamped it that only a maximum of $30,000 per project. But the results of this year's neighborhood decision making was recently announced. And for those in Ward 12, again, there was nothing in our area. So some residents are still raising concerns about a disparity of where the money gets spread across the city. Some people are raising concerns that some schools are taking it, and with sometimes more affluent schools who already have multiple playgrounds are still getting another playground while other schools have nothing new. So there are some community conversations that I would like to have about that. So really the discussion before us is going to be, is this a program we're willing to cut or reduce even temporarily? And if it is up for consideration, is that going to affect public participation in it, which is the community engagement that I really love to see. And for residents, sometimes even if our ideas don't get picked, our staff keep it. So if it's a park idea, you know, we had ideas in Ward 12 that never got picked, but staff looked at the ideas and said, oh, there really actually is a need for a basketball court enhancement at Earl Nichols Park. So it actually went forward. So it's nice that those ideas still live on, even if we don't see them that year. But this is one that, as a ward councilor, I'm on the fence about, recognizing the tax rate and where it's at, and where residents are telling me that they'd prefer it to stay. And that's one of those considerations we might, I'm sure will be a full discussion at council. Kyle, did you have anything else? Sorry, Mr. Murray, did you have anything else? We've spent so much time together. You've seen my dog.
It's true.
Is there anything else you want to add in on that one?
No, the only thing I will maybe add to that is, you know, from a broader context, I guess, of you know, there's a number of services that the city delivers that are either mandated or legislated or required in some way. So if we're going and we're looking for opportunities to reduce services or reduce service levels in order to reduce the tax levy, we're somewhat restricted in terms of some of the programs that we can go to identify those savings. We're really forced to look at those discretionary programs where we have a choice of whether we deliver the service to begin with, and if so, how much of the service in terms of what service level we're providing that we currently provide. So that, I guess, is just some further context in terms of why this program is a consideration, is that it really falls into one of those discretionary things that council has more ability to adjust if desired.
Perfect, thank you. Molly, any comment on that, or?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the answer. It does sound like there is reason to reconsider the process. I just think it's a great program and really engaging. So I hope that the program sticks around with as much force as possible. Thanks.
Perfect. No, that's great feedback, as it is one that I know will be contentious debate. For those who endure watching our debates at council with the budget, Mr. Murray does have a screen he puts up for us that says where the tax rate currently is at, and based on any decision point that we're discussing at that moment, we can watch Mr. Murray's chart go up or down and the tax rate change. So I know that will be a consideration as we move along the process of keeping an eye on the tax rate of what individual councilors have in mind, and how each impact affects it as we go. The next hand I had up was Bob.
Great. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. So through the budget process, is there a way to encourage like inward and upward development, like in the London plan? Is that primarily going to be through tax policy, where you sort of finalize the budget and then you say who's actually what type of, is it commercial getting more increase? Is it multi-residential can get less of an increase? Or is zoning going to be more, like outside the budget process, is zoning going to be more important, sort of encourage that inward and upward development?
Okay, thank you for that. I'm sure it's going to be a more in-depth answer. Mr. Murray, I'll let you start.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. There are ways, I suppose, through our budget, and I'm speaking in general terms about our budget, not necessarily in relation to any of the specific budget amendments this year. But generally speaking, there certainly are components of our budget that encourage inward and upward development. So, you know, a great example that I can point to very easily is the rapid transit capital projects that are in our budget and were approved through our budget a number of years ago, specifically related to the downtown loop, the Wellington Gateway, and the East London Link. Those are the ones that are proceeding at this point. Certainly, those are great examples of the budget supporting inward and upward development. But I think the important thing to remember as well is that the budget is really the implementation tool for all of the strategic plans and priorities in the background. So, certainly you mentioned the London plan. That's a primary example. Of course, a significant driver of our budget is our strategic plan as well. So that's a key input into our budget process as well. So the budget process is really the outcome or the implementation tool, I guess, of those other strategic plans or objectives. You mentioned tax policy as well. I mean, that, I suppose, indirectly could have an impact on inward and upward development, perhaps, if we're assuming that inward and upward development involves a lot more multi-residential development. So in that context, then that process could also have an indirect impact on incenting inward and upward development as well. So that's a long-winded way, I guess, of trying to answer your question, but I hope I've done that. But really, I guess the best way to think about it is the budget is really the culmination of a lot of different plans and priorities that then provide the resources that are required to implement those goals. Anything to add, Councillor?
Just, I guess, the odd tidbit that I believe that the city has for development, a target around 60% is supposed to be infill versus as we expand out towards the urban growth boundaries. And we're certainly going to be seeing more of that in Ward 12 in the next coming years based on the south leg of the bus rapid transit plan along Wellington corridor being approved. And the city is currently redoing their Rethink zoning. It's a Rethink zoning project looking at everything from development, parking minimums, maximums, and what we should be doing. And that program will come forward once the report is ready for public consultation and input, but it is going to be a bigger one in a multi-year process. Same with the city's mobility master plan. Lots of things in the works, and the city's has waste climate targets, and some of those are going to be like 25-year plans. That's going to take us far into the future. So give me lots of time for public input. Bob, do you have a follow-up question or comment? Because that was a lot of information.
No, I appreciate that. So I guess sort of related is Climate Emergency Action Plan. Do you know when that's going to be actually presented? Because I suspect that's where from like climate initiatives, environmental sustainability, financial sustainability, I'm looking for like new initiatives and new projects over on top. I totally agree with the bus rapid transit stuff. That's great stuff. Like, but if we're looking for new items, is that going to primarily come out? I love the idea of the Rethink zoning. That's great. But do you have any ideas when the Climate Emergency Action Plan will come forward?
Yeah, it's not going to be the answer that either of us wanted to hear. So for those joining us, as Mr. Murray said, the bus rapid transit plan, there was supposed to be 5 sections. This council only got 3 sections figured out. So that's going to be a job for the next council in 2023 to sort out. The city has a climate emergency screening tool that was developed that we started to use that gives a climate lens to the projects that come forward of, it's one of those boxes of, is this good for the environment? Is it going to help us reach our net zero emissions by 2050, I think was our goal. As for the climate emergency plan, a big overall plan, It was supposed to be brought forward very soon, and I've been recently told that that's been postponed until around February. Just COVID's held a few things up, and there's a few other governmental announcements that's held things up, but it is still coming. And in my next newsletter, I'll share it. I actually had my first interview with TVO the other day, and they were looking to London as one of the leaders, having actually declared a climate emergency, but doing something about it with our climate emergency screening tools and this climate emergency plan that we're still waiting on. So it is nice that London is doing great work and putting words into action and being recognized as a leader in Ontario, as we have more people moving here and hoping to retain some of our talent from the universities and the colleges. It should help be a place that people would want to stay and raise their family. And as a mom whose kids are ready to go to post-secondary, I'm really selfish and hoping that my kids can stay and enjoy the city and everything that it has to offer. Bob, is that satisfactory for your climate plan questions?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Sort of the follow-up you actually might hate, but because you're just putting a lot of effort into this year's budget process. But if the climate emergency action plan gets tabled in February, when does the process for like the full budget next year start? Like, hopefully that climate emergency action plan is put forward prior to the next sort of budget process.
Yeah, Kyle, I'll let you start on, or Mr. Murray, I'll let you start on this
Yep.
one, just based on the fact that 2022 is an election year municipally, starts in May and finishes in October. So I may or may not be around. So it's best to get that information from you.
Yeah, so the budget process, we get started on it in the summer months, and it's ultimately next year likely to be tabled at council. If we're lucky, we might be able to slide it in December, but it's possible that just depending on how the council meetings land, it might not be till January. The one piece, I guess, on the climate emergency action plan to keep in mind is that this I will caution that this is going to be a long-term plan that we will have to no doubt fund over a number of multi-year budget cycles. It's going to, in my estimation, require a significant resource commitment, and it's certainly not likely to be something that we can accomplish all in one multi-year budget cycle. It's going to need to be staged and spread out over a number of years, appreciating that we certainly have a target that we will need to work towards in terms of achieving net zero, but it won't happen, at least from a funding perspective, overnight. We're going to need to be thoughtful and mindful and prudent about how we fund that plan in order to not overly burden the taxpayer in any particular given year.
Great. Thanks, both of you, for your time.
Perfect. Thank you, Bob, for joining us this evening. So I've just put a note to everyone looking to see if there's any other further questions or comments from the group. We certainly have some time left, but oh, perfect. 2 people. So I think we've, and Bob, you are satisfied, so we can take your hand down, and perfect. Okay, so just looking to see if there's any other, Molly, did you have another question?
Yeah, it's just a comment, actually. I was just pleased to see number 8, both the less lawn mowing, more naturalization, and the less proactive tree trimming. I can say that I live in Wortley Village, and I've seen very proactive tree trimming to an excess. So I think that's a good move. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. And it seems to be different areas of town have different, I want to say levels of care, but sometimes it just seems to be the way it is. For area residents in Ward 12, those familiar with Cleardale Park, based behind Cleardale Public School, apparently there's a low-lying area in that park. Apparently the bunnies nest in there, and residents have actually asked that area be more naturalized to make sure there's more habitat for the rabbits, and that our grass cutting equipment by the city stops getting stuck in there every spring. So that is feedback that residents took to staff, and then staff are gonna do that area for us in Ward 12, which would be great. And Marianne, you had a further question?
Yes, I do echo the comments about the lawn mowing. That's great to hear. My question was around P12, the zero emission buses. It said that there's no tax levy impact for this budget item. So where is the money coming from?
No, it's a great question. Thanks for that one. I maybe skimmed over it in my haste to keep you all from falling asleep through my presentation. So that budget amendment, we're still trying to I guess finalize the funding source, or I guess it will be contingent on further information that we're still yet to obtain. Our preliminary recommendation on that one is to hopefully be able to access a new funding program that is being offered by Infrastructure Canada. It's known as the Zero Emissions Transit Fund. So it's something that's very, very recent. Our understanding, and again, we don't have specific program parameters for that funding program yet, but at least our preliminary intelligence on it is that it will provide up to 50% of the costs associated with that project. The other 50% would then be the responsibility of the municipality. For our portion, that's something that we're suggesting is an appropriate use of debt financing to spread the cost of that initiative out over a number of years. We will, of course, have to pay that debt back, but that's not something that, given the timeline of this project rolling out, it's not something that we would have those debt servicing costs until our next multi-year budget cycle. So that's why there's no tax levy impact to that amendment in this cycle. So I hope that helps explain it a little more.
Marianne, a follow-up?
No, that's fine. Although maybe just a comment that I did chuckle a little bit that, you know, there's no tax levy for this year's budget, but making the decision to do that does have future tax levy implications, perhaps depending on whether that new fund is successful or not. Although I do support that initiative regardless.
Perfect. As Mr. Murray had laid out in his presentation, there was some deferrals to future years for Ontario Works and childcare, which means we see a reduction this year, which is great, but then that would also mean next year, if it moves forward, we're going to see a bump back up. But next year, staff will be doing a deep dive into the budget as they did this year, looking for more savings opportunities. If there's any federal or provincial money out there that we can leverage to make our London tax dollars go farther, absolutely, we're going to seek those opportunities out and do them. So looking to see if there's any other questions or comments. I put Mr. Murray's contact information and mine in the chat as well. For those who are new to this process, you can join in and watch or participate in the public participation meeting next Monday on the 2nd. It is a full day meeting for budget deliberations on December 2nd. I'm hoping to get it done all in one day. We don't need the 2nd and 3rd. And then the full vote goes to council on the 21st. And at any of those decision points, even if we decide on things on December 2nd, if you have questions or comments about it, you're welcome to write myself or your ward councillor, recognizing that you're not all Ward 12 residents, or even council as a whole. If you want everyone to know something of, hey, I really think it's smart that we are taking energy savings from Greenway and rolling it back into environmental efforts. If it's something like that, absolutely, you can tell everyone on council, or if it's neighborhood decision making of, you know, do what you need to do, but please make sure the program's still as impactful as possible to give residents their voice. We will gladly take all that feedback and share it amongst ourselves, so we can make informed decisions for residents and Londoners based on what you're telling us. So I'll just do a last call. This meeting has been recorded and will be available later. I will ask one other thing. Loredana, can you unmute yourself and put yourself on the screen? This is Loredana. She is absolutely amazing. and not just because she pays me to tell me that. But she is one of, she actually runs all the assistants out front right now. And when you call in, she might be one of the wonderful people you get. She also services as an admin to several counselors, including myself. So sometimes you'll get an answer from Liradonna, and this is the Liradonna. So she is most helpful and is always at these meetings and a great service to the city. So when you write in, it might be her. And thank you to everyone who writes in with kindness, as COVID has been hard on many people, including our staff here at City Hall. So Liradonna, I doubt if you want to say anything because you're never the person who wants the limelight, but thank you for turning your screen on, and you can go back as you were.
Thank you.
For residents, Liradonna has supported me on and off for several years. She's helping me plan a ward meeting in the spring, as I promised one. Just this year's turned into a budget meeting, as it was a new opportunity to expand our knowledge together. The spring ward meeting will be back in person. I am very confident that London is doing great at being resilient and doing the right steps for COVID-19 and overcoming it. So I'm looking forward to welcoming everyone, Ward 12 residents or otherwise, to the South London Community Center in the spring for a ward meeting about the landfill, green bins, public safety, policing, and we may get an extra meeting along the way, which is always open to everybody. I'm working with our school board trustees as they are doing a ward boundary review of schools and holding zones. So some public interest in that, definitely for those of us who have kids, of how that's going to look for the city. And it's not our jurisdiction as municipal councilors, but I am here to service residents and have a conversation about it. So thank you to everyone who have spent their time with us, always available offline as well. Thank you to Mr. Murray for summer vacation and a great fall. And his staff does phenomenal work with him, and you've had an opportunity to connect with him tonight. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy your evenings.
Thanks, everyone.